The auditorium was packed that bright June morning. Parents crowded into every available seat, their phones already out and ready to capture the moment their kids walked across that stage. You could feel the excitement in the air. 4 years of hard work, late night studying, friendships made and broken, all leading up to this one day. Graduation day at Riverside High School. The graduating class of 2019 sat in neat rows, a sea of blue caps and gowns. Some students fidgeted with their tassels. Others whispered to friends sitting nearby, trying not to laugh too loud. A few looked genuinely emotional, wiping away tears before the ceremony even started. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for since freshman year. Principal Morrison took the stage, his voice booming through the microphone. He welcomed everyone and launched into the usual speech about journeys, futures, and the importance of this milestone. Parents nodded along. Teachers sat in a special section to the side, many of them looking proud but also a little sad to see another class move on. Then the name-calling began. One by one, students stood up when they heard their name, walked down the aisle, climbed the steps to the stage, shook hands with the principal, grabbed their diploma, smiled for the official photo, and returned to their seats. The audience clapped for each one. Some families cheered extra loud, embarrassing their graduate with whistles and shouts. Everything was going exactly as planned. Until Principal Morrison called out, "Daniel Park." There was a pause. No one stood up. The principal looked down at his list, then back up at the rows of students. He called the name again, a little louder this time. Daniel Park, still nothing. Just empty air where a student should have been standing. In the third row, seat number 147 remained completely empty. The blue chair stood out like a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. Teachers sitting on the side began glancing at each other. Mrs. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, frowned and leaned over to whisper something to Mr. Hughes, the math teacher. He shrugged, looking confused. Some students in Daniel's row turned around, looking at the empty seat behind them or beside them, as if Daniel might suddenly appear. Parents in the audience started whispering too. A few checked their programs, running their fingers down the list of names to make sure they'd heard correctly. Yes, there it was. Daniel Park, listed right there in alphabetical order. But no Daniel. Principal Morrison cleared his throat. For just a moment, you could see the uncertainty on his face. Should he wait? Should he say something? But then he made a decision. He nodded slightly, made a small mark on his paper, and moved on to the next name, Michelle Peterson. Michelle stood up and walked to the stage like nothing had happened. The ceremony continued, but that empty chair stayed empty, and people kept glancing at it, wondering. Some students who knew Daniel started texting under their gowns, trying to be sneaky about it. "Where are you? Dude, what happened? You okay?" But no responses came back. Their messages just sat there, delivered but unread. Nobody in that auditorium really knew Daniel. Not really. Sure, people recognized him. He'd been there all 4 years. He wasn't invisible, but he wasn't exactly visible either. He was just there. One of those students who didn't cause trouble, didn't join clubs, didn't hang out after school. He came to class, sat in the back, did his work, and left. If you'd asked Daniel's classmates to describe him, they'd struggle. He's quiet, I guess. Keeps to himself? I think he lives over on Maple Street. Nobody could tell you much more than that. He wasn't on the football team. He wasn't in drama club. He didn't go to parties or post on social media. He was just a name on a roster, a face in the hallway, a student in a desk. The teachers didn't know much more. Daniel turned in his assignments, mostly on time. His grades were okay, nothing spectacular. B's and C's, a few A's here and there. He never raised his hand in class. Never stayed after to ask questions. Never got sent to the principal's office. He was the definition of unremarkable, at least on paper. But here's the thing about being unremarkable. It means people don't look too closely. They don't ask questions. They don't wonder what's really going on beneath the surface. And sometimes that's exactly what someone wants. To not be seen. To not be asked. To just survive each day without anyone noticing the cracks. As the ceremony went on, as more names were called and more students walked across that stage, the empty chair in row 3 became less noticeable. People stopped glancing at it. They focused on their own kids, their own moment. By the time the last name was called and the principal announced that the class of 2019 was officially graduated, most people had forgotten all about seat 147. The students threw their caps in the air. Parents rushed forward with flowers and cameras. There were hugs and tears and laughter. Families gathered for photos on the front steps of the school. Groups of friends made plans to meet up later for parties. It was chaos in the best possible way. But Mrs. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, didn't rush forward. She stayed in her seat staring at that empty chair. Something wasn't right. She'd been teaching for 23 years and she'd seen a lot. Students who skipped graduation because they were too cool for it. Students who didn't walk because they were short a few credits. Students who had family emergencies at the last minute. But Daniel, something told her this was different. She thought about the boy she'd had in her class junior year. She remembered him sitting in the back corner. Always the first one there, always the last one to leave. She remembered how he'd worn the same 3 shirts, rotating them through the week. She remembered the day she'd handed back tests and noticed his hands shaking as he looked at his A-, like that grade meant everything in the world to him. She remembered other things too, small things that most teachers wouldn't notice or would forget, like how Daniel never bought lunch in the cafeteria. He'd sit in the library instead, supposedly studying, but she'd seen him just sitting there staring at his books, his stomach probably growling, or how he always volunteered to stay late and help clean up after lab experiments, and she'd suspected it was because he didn't want to go home yet. Mrs. Patterson pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. She found Daniel's number, the one all students had to provide at the beginning of the year for emergency contact purposes. She sent a simple text. "Daniel, this is Mrs. Patterson, just checking if you're okay. Your seat was empty today." She watched the screen. The message showed as delivered. Then after a moment it showed as read, but no response came. Just that read receipt, proof that wherever Daniel was, whatever was happening, he'd seen her message. And he'd chosen not to respond. The auditorium slowly emptied out. Families headed to restaurants for celebration lunches. Students made plans for graduation parties that night. The maintenance crew began breaking down the chairs and cleaning up the programs that had been left behind. Mrs. Patterson finally stood up and gathered her things. She walked down to row 3 and stood next to seat 147. She looked at it for a long moment, this empty chair that had held a space for a boy nobody really knew, a boy whose absence barely registered in a room full of celebration. She didn't know the full story yet. Nobody did. But she knew enough to be worried. And unlike most people in that auditorium, Mrs. Patterson wasn't going to just move on with her day and forget about the empty chair, because sometimes the most important stories are the ones nobody's paying attention to, the ones happening in the spaces between what everyone else sees. Daniel Park's empty chair had told a story that morning. But it wasn't the story anyone thought it was telling. 4 years earlier, Daniel had walked through the doors of Riverside High School for the first time as a freshman. He'd been like any other kid that first day, maybe a little nervous, sure, but also excited. He had a new backpack his mom had saved up for months to buy, new notebooks, new pens. He'd even picked out his outfit the night before, wanting to make a good impression. That first semester, Daniel did great. He raised his hand in class. He joined the robotics club. He ate lunch with a small group of friends from middle school. His report card came home with straight A's and his mom cried happy tears. She hung it on the refrigerator with a magnet, telling him how proud she was, how he was going to be the first person in their family to go to college. His dad worked at a warehouse across town, and money had always been tight, but they managed. They had a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was home. Dinner was usually something simple, rice and whatever his mom could make stretch for 3 people. But there was always enough. Always love. Always support. Daniel's little sister was in 5th grade then, and she'd sometimes ask him for help with her homework. He'd sit with her at their tiny kitchen table, patiently explaining math problems or helping her study for spelling tests. On weekends, if there was a little extra money, their dad would take them to the park or maybe for ice cream. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Daniel had plans. He wanted to study engineering. He'd always been good at figuring out how things worked, taking them apart and putting them back together. His robotics teacher said he had real talent. College seemed like something that could actually happen, but then sophomore year started and everything changed. It happened fast. His dad came home one evening in October with that look on his face. The look that said something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. The warehouse had laid off half its workers. His dad was one of them. Just like that, the steady paycheck that kept their family afloat was gone. His dad tried to stay positive at first. He'd find something else, he said. The economy was good. There were other jobs. He spent his days filling out applications, making phone calls, going to interviews. But weeks turned into months and nothing came through. The jobs that were hiring paid less than what he'd made before. Or they were too far away and they didn't have money for the gas to get there. Daniel watched his parents try to hide their worry. Watched them have quiet conversations in their bedroom with the door closed. Watched his mom start skipping meals, saying she wasn't hungry, putting more food on Daniel's plate and his sister's plate instead. The bills started piling up. First they were late on rent, then behind on utilities. His mom picked up extra shifts at her cleaning job, working herself to exhaustion. She'd leave before Daniel woke up for school and come home after he was already in bed. Some mornings he'd find her asleep on the couch, still in her work clothes, too tired to make it to the bedroom. That's when Daniel made a decision. He was 15 years old and he decided he needed to help. He couldn't just sit there doing homework and going to robotics club while his family struggled. So he got a job. The grocery store on 4th Street needed someone to stock shelves early in the morning. Daniel lied about his age, said he was 16. They didn't check too carefully. He started showing up at 5 in the morning before school, hauling boxes and organizing products. He'd work for 2 hours, then run to school, usually sliding into his first period class right as the bell rang. He was exhausted, but the money helped. Not a lot, but enough to buy groceries sometimes. Enough to help with the electric bill. He gave every paycheck to his mom, who tried to refuse at first, but eventually accepted it with tears in her eyes. But working meant less time for everything else. Daniel had to quit robotics club. He couldn't stay after school anymore when all the meetings happened. His friends started hanging out without him, making plans during times he had to work. Slowly, he drifted away from them. It wasn't anyone's fault. They invited him to stuff, but he always had to say no. Eventually, they stopped asking. His grades started slipping too. It's hard to focus on algebra when you've been awake since 4:30 in the morning lifting heavy boxes. It's hard to care about reading assignments when you're worried about whether your family will have a place to live next month. He went from straight A's to B's, then from B's to C's. His teachers noticed but didn't say much. Just comments on his report cards about not applying himself, about his potential. Nobody asked why. Nobody looked deeper. To them, Daniel was just another student who'd lost motivation. It happened all the time. Kids start high school strong and then coast. It wasn't unusual. It didn't raise red flags junior year, things got worse. His mom started getting sick. At first, they thought it was just stress and exhaustion. She'd get dizzy spells, terrible headaches, but then one night she collapsed at work. The emergency room doctor said her blood pressure was dangerously high. She had a heart condition they'd never known about. She needed medication, needed to reduce her stress, needed to work less. But working less meant less money, and they were already drowning. His dad had finally found a job, but it was part-time, minimum wage, nothing like what he'd made before. The medical bills from the emergency room visit sat on their kitchen counter, thousands of dollars they had no way to pay. Daniel got a second job. A gas station near their apartment needed someone for evening shifts. He'd go to school, exhausted from his morning job, barely staying awake in class, then head straight to the gas station after the final bell rang. He'd work until 11 at night, get home, maybe do a little homework if he could keep his eyes open, sleep for a few hours, then get up and do it all again. His friends were gone by then. He'd stopped trying to maintain those relationships. What was the point? They were worried about who was dating who, about football games and school dances. Daniel was worried about keeping the lights on. They lived in different worlds now, even though they walked the same hallways. He started wearing the same few clothes over and over. There was no money for new ones, and honestly, he didn't care anymore. He stopped getting haircuts, letting his hair grow long and messy. He stopped participating in class, just sitting in the back, trying to stay awake, trying to be invisible. Teachers started seeing him as a problem student. Not because he caused trouble, but because he was clearly checked out. He'd put his head down on his desk sometimes. He'd turn in assignments late or not at all. He was failing some classes, barely passing others. The guidance counselor called him in once, asking if everything was okay at home. Daniel just nodded and said everything was fine. He wasn't about to tell some stranger that his family was falling apart. Senior year was supposed to be exciting. College applications? Senior activities planning for the future. Daniel's classmates were touring universities, writing essays about their dreams and aspirations. Daniel was picking up extra shifts wherever he could find them. His mom's health was getting worse. She needed more medications now, more doctor visits they couldn't afford. His dad's part-time job wasn't enough. Daniel's 2 jobs weren't enough. It was never enough. He stopped eating lunch at school, saving that money for his family instead. He'd sit in the library during lunch period, pretending to study, his stomach cramping with hunger. Sometimes Mrs. Patterson, his old chemistry teacher, would see him there and leave a granola bar on the table next to him. Like she'd forgotten it. He knew she hadn't forgotten it. He knew she was trying to help without making him feel like charity. He appreciated it more than she'd ever know. But he was also ashamed. Ashamed that his situation was visible even to just one person. College applications came and went. Daniel didn't fill out a single one. What was the point? He didn't have money for application fees, let alone tuition. He didn't have time for college. He had to work. He had to help his family survive. Dreams of engineering school, of building things and solving problems. Those felt like they belonged to a different person, a person he used to be but wasn't anymore. His classmates talked about their acceptance letters, their scholarship offers, their exciting plans. Daniel nodded along when he had to, pretending to care, pretending he was also applying places. But inside he felt hollow, like he was watching everyone else's life move forward while his stood completely still. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion or the hunger or even the worry about money. The worst part was the loneliness. Daniel felt completely alone even in a school full of people. Nobody knew what he was going through. Nobody asked. And he didn't tell anyone because what would be the point? They couldn't help. They couldn't fix it. And he didn't want their pity, so he stayed quiet. He showed up, did what he had to do, and stayed invisible. Being invisible was safer. It meant nobody asked questions he didn't want to answer. It meant nobody looked at him with sympathy or judgment. It meant he could just exist day by day, one foot in front of the other, holding everything together by sheer force of will. By the time graduation approached, Daniel was barely holding on. He'd somehow managed to pass enough classes to graduate, though just barely. His GPA was nothing to be proud of, but he'd done it. 4 years of survival, 4 years of carrying weight nobody else could see. His mom wanted to come to graduation. She was so proud of him, but Daniel knew what that would mean. She'd have to take time off work she couldn't afford to miss. She'd have to see the other families, the ones who looked happy and put together, and feel bad about what she couldn't give him. He told her the ceremony was small, not that important, that she shouldn't worry about it. The truth was, Daniel wasn't sure he even wanted to go. What was there to celebrate? He'd survived, but he hadn't thrived. He hadn't accomplished anything special. He hadn't lived up to any of the potential everyone said he had back in 9th grade. He was just tired. So incredibly tired. Mrs. Patterson had been teaching chemistry at Riverside High School for 23 years. She'd seen thousands of students come through her classroom. Most of them blurred together after a while, just faces and names that she'd eventually forget. But every few years there was a student who stuck with her, someone who reminded her why she'd become a teacher in the first place. Daniel had been one of those students, though she doubted he knew it. She first had him in her class during his junior year. He'd shuffled in on the first day, taking a seat in the back corner without making eye contact with anyone. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of students tried to hide in the back. But Mrs. Patterson noticed something different about this boy. The way he sat so still, like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. The way his clothes hung a bit loose on his frame. The way his eyes had this exhausted, faraway look even on the first day of school. She'd grown up poor herself back in the 70s. Her dad had worked 3 jobs to keep their family fed. Her mom had sewn their clothes from fabric scraps. She remembered wearing shoes with cardboard stuffed in them to cover the holes. She remembered the shame of it, the way she'd tried so hard to hide their poverty from her classmates. She remembered what it felt like to be hungry, to be tired, to carry the weight of her family's struggles on young shoulders. So when she looked at Daniel, she saw herself. She saw all the signs that others missed because they didn't know to look for them. She started watching him more carefully, not in a creepy way, but in the way a teacher watches when they're concerned. She noticed how he was always the first student to arrive, usually a full 10 minutes before class started. He'd sit at his desk with his textbook open, reading ahead, making notes in the margins, actually paying attention, actually caring about the material, which was rare for a junior taking chemistry. She noticed how he'd light up during labs, how his whole face would change when he got to mix chemicals and see reactions happen. He was good at it too. Careful, methodical, smart. He understood concepts that other students struggled with. He asked good questions, thoughtful ones, the kind that showed he was really thinking about the material. But she also noticed the other things. How he never had a calculator and would borrow one from the supply bin. How his textbook was clearly used, not new like the other students' books, and how he treated it like something precious, never bending the pages, always careful with it. How he wore the same rotation of 3 shirts week after week, a black t-shirt, a gray long sleeve, and a navy hoodie. That was it, over and over. She noticed how thin he looked, how his jeans had that worn look that came from being washed too many times, how his sneakers had holes in them that he tried to hide by wearing his jeans long, how he never bought anything from the vending machines, never had lunch money, never participated when other students talked about going out to eat. About a month into the semester, she started noticing him putting his head down during class, not every day but often enough that it became a pattern. He'd fight it at first, his head bobbing up and down as he tried to stay awake. Eventually he'd give in, laying his head on his arms, falling asleep right there at his desk. Other teachers might have gotten angry, might have sent him to the principal's office for sleeping in class. But Mrs. Patterson remembered being so tired she could barely function. She remembered falling asleep at the dinner table in the school library, anywhere she could rest for a moment. So instead of punishing him, she'd let him sleep for a few minutes, then gently wake him when it was time for the lab or the important part of the lesson. She started leaving granola bars and crackers in a basket on her desk, telling the class they were there if anyone needed a snack. She knew who'd take them. Daniel would grab one quickly, almost guiltily, stuffing it in his backpack when he thought no one was looking. She always made sure to restock the basket. One day after class, she asked him to stay behind. He'd looked panicked, like he was in trouble, but she just asked how he was doing, if everything was okay. He'd given her the same answer teenagers always gave when they didn't want to talk about it. "I'm fine. Everything's fine." She didn't push. She just told him that if he ever needed anything, her door was always open. He'd nodded and practically run out of the room. As the year went on, she saw him deteriorating. His grades started dropping, not because he didn't understand the material, but because he wasn't turning in homework. He'd ace the tests, proving he knew his stuff, but the homework just didn't get done. She started giving him extensions without him asking, making up excuses about her grading schedule being behind. She asked around about him, carefully, to other teachers. They all said the same things. Quiet kid. Used to be a good student. Seemed unmotivated now. Probably lazy. Maybe dealing with typical teenage stuff. Nobody seemed concerned. Nobody seemed to see what she saw. That's when Mrs. Patterson decided to do something more. She couldn't fix his whole life, but maybe she could help in small ways. Ways that wouldn't embarrass him or make him feel like charity. She started with the gift cards. She bought grocery store gift cards with her own money, $25 at a time. Nothing huge, but enough to help. She'd slip them into his locker with anonymous notes. "Saw you drop this. Thought you might need it. Found this in the hallway. Must be yours." She watched from down the hall the first time he found one, saw the confusion on his face, then the way he quickly pocketed it and looked around to see if anyone was watching. She bought them regularly after that. Once or twice a month, a gift card would appear in his locker. She never told anyone. This was between her and this boy who was trying so hard to survive. When junior year ended and she didn't have Daniel in class anymore, she still kept an eye on him. She'd see him in the hallways looking more exhausted, more worn down. She'd see him rushing out of school while other students hung around socializing. She knew he was working, though she didn't know where or how much. The signs were all there. Senior year, she saw the guidance counselor's list of students who hadn't submitted any college applications. Daniel's name was on that list. It made her angry, not at him, but at the system. Here was a smart kid, a kid with potential, and nobody was helping him. Nobody was making sure he had the opportunities he deserved. She took matters into her own hands. She wrote him letters of recommendation without being asked. She researched scholarships. the kind specifically for students in difficult financial situations. She filled out the basic information herself, leaving just the personal essay parts for him to complete. She left the packets in his locker with a note. "Thought you might be interested in these. They're due next month." She didn't know if he'd follow through. She couldn't force him. But she could at least give him the option, give him the tools. Whether he used them was up to him. Around March of senior year, she heard through the teacher grapevine that Daniel was in danger of not graduating. He was failing 2 classes, barely passing the others. She felt sick. This couldn't happen. This boy had worked too hard, survived too much. She talked to the teachers of those classes, pleaded his case without revealing too much. She offered to tutor him herself during lunch periods. She found Daniel after school one day, catching him as he rushed toward the parking lot. She told him she needed a student assistant, someone to help her organize the lab equipment, clean up after classes, prepare materials. She'd pay him minimum wage 10 hours a week. It was a lie. She didn't need help, but she knew he needed money, and this was a way to give it to him without it being charity. He'd looked at her with those tired eyes, and for just a moment, she thought she saw them water, but he blinked and the moment passed. He took the job. For the rest of the semester, he showed up during his free periods and after school, helping her with tasks she made up on the spot. She paid him from her own pocket, telling the school she had a budget for student assistance when they asked. Those hours working together, they didn't talk much. Daniel wasn't a talker, but slowly, gradually, he seemed a little less burdened. Having that extra money helped, she could tell. She'd see him in the hallways looking slightly less exhausted. His grades came up just enough for him to pass his classes. He was going to graduate. Mrs. Patterson had done what she could. She couldn't fix his home situation. She couldn't give his mother better health or his father a better job. She couldn't erase the trauma of years of struggle, but she'd helped him survive. She'd made sure he got across that finish line. Graduation day came and she was excited to see Daniel walk across that stage. She'd bought him something, a graduation present. It was a nice graphing calculator, the expensive kind that engineering students needed. Inside the box, she'd tucked an envelope with $500 in it, money she'd been saving for months. There was also a note that said, "For college, you're going to do amazing things." She sat in the teacher section that morning, scanning the rows of students in their blue caps and gowns, looking for him. She had the gift bag with her, ready to give it to him after the ceremony. She'd planned what she'd say, how she'd tell him she believed in him, how she'd seen his potential all along, how proud she was of him. But when they called his name and no one stood up, her heart dropped. That empty chair in row 3 felt like a punch to the gut. Where was he? What had happened? After everything, after all her efforts, after all his hard work, he wasn't here? She pulled out her phone and sent him a text, her hands shaking slightly. She watched it show as delivered, then as read, but no response came. Just that read receipt, telling her he'd seen her message but wasn't answering. The ceremony ended. Families celebrated, students threw their caps in the air, and Mrs. Patterson sat there staring at her phone, waiting for a response that didn't come. The gift bag sat on her lap, suddenly feeling very heavy. She'd spent 4 years watching this boy struggle. 4 years trying to help in whatever small ways she could. 4 years hoping he'd make it. And now, on what should have been his day of triumph, he was gone. His chair was empty, and she had no idea why. The morning of graduation, Daniel woke up at 4:30 like he always did. His alarm hadn't even gone off yet, but his body was so used to the routine that it just woke him automatically now. He lay there in the darkness for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment. His dad snoring in the next room, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, traffic starting to pick up on the street outside. Today was supposed to be different. Today he wasn't supposed to go to his morning shift at the grocery store. Today was graduation day. He'd managed to get the day off, something that had taken a week of negotiations with his manager. He'd even laid out his outfit the night before. The suit that had mysteriously appeared on his doorstep a few days ago, wrapped in plain brown paper with no note. He didn't know where it came from, but it fit perfectly. He'd hung it carefully on the back of his door, ready for today. He got up and went to the kitchen, thinking maybe he'd make his mom some breakfast. She'd been so excited about graduation. Even though he'd told her she didn't need to come, she insisted, though. She'd taken the morning off work. even though they couldn't afford it. She'd been talking about it for weeks, about how proud she was, about taking photos of him in his cap and gown. The kitchen light was already on. That was strange. His mom should still be asleep. But when he walked in, he found her sitting at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, her face pale and sweaty. One hand was pressed to her chest. The other gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "Mom?" His voice came out scared, young-sounding, like a little kid. She tried to smile at him, tried to say something, but then her face twisted in pain. She gasped, that hand on her chest pressing harder. Daniel's heart started pounding. He knew this wasn't good. He'd seen her have episodes before, times when her heart condition acted up. But this looked worse. This looked bad. "I'm calling an ambulance," he said, already reaching for his phone. "No." Her voice was weak but firm. "Too expensive. Just help me to the couch. I'll be fine. Just need to rest. Mom, this is serious. You need help. Daniel, we can't afford another ER bill. We still haven't paid off the last one." She was crying now, tears running down her face, whether from pain or frustration or both, he couldn't tell. "Your graduation. I'm supposed to go to your graduation." But Daniel was already dialing. Money didn't matter if his mom was dying. Nothing mattered except getting her help. The 911 operator answered, and Daniel tried to keep his voice steady as he gave their address, as he described what was happening. The operator told him to stay calm, told him to help his mom stay comfortable, told him the ambulance was on its way. His dad came running out in his pajamas, woken by the commotion. "What's happening? What's wrong?" "It's Mom, her heart. I called an ambulance." His dad's face went white. He rushed to his wife's side, taking her hand, talking to her in a low, soothing voice. Daniel stood there feeling helpless, watching his mother struggle to breathe, watching his father try not to fall apart. The minutes until the ambulance arrived felt like hours. When the paramedics finally came, they moved fast. They got his mom on a stretcher, asked quick questions, started checking her vitals. One of them looked at Daniel and his dad. "Which one of you is riding with her?" Daniel looked at his dad, whose face was streaked with tears. Then he looked at his little sister, who'd woken up and was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, looking terrified. Someone needed to stay with her. Someone needed to be strong right now. "I'll go," Daniel said. "Dad, you stay with her." He meant his sister, but he couldn't quite say her name. His voice would crack if he did. The ambulance ride was a blur. His mom kept asking about his graduation, kept apologizing, kept saying she'd ruined his special day. Daniel held her hand and told her it didn't matter, told her she was what mattered, told her everything would be okay even though he had no idea if it would be. The ER was chaos. Nurses and doctors rushing around, machines beeping, people crying in other rooms. They took his mom back immediately, which Daniel knew meant it was serious. They wouldn't rush her back like that if it wasn't. A nurse told him to wait in the waiting room, that someone would update him as soon as they knew something. So Daniel sat. He was still in the clothes he'd slept in, old sweatpants and a t-shirt. He should be getting ready for graduation right now. He should be putting on that suit, fixing his hair, trying to look presentable. Instead, he was sitting in a hospital waiting room that smelled like disinfectant and fear, watching the clock tick by. He pulled out his phone. It was 7:30. Graduation started at 9. His dad was texting him, asking for updates. His sister was asking if Mom was okay. He didn't have answers for them. He just kept texting back that he'd let them know as soon as he heard something. Then his phone buzzed with another text. "Mrs. Patterson." "Daniel, this is Mrs. Patterson. Just checking if you're okay. Your seat was empty today." He stared at the message. Graduation had already started. He'd missed it. He'd missed the one thing he'd worked 4 years for, the one milestone he'd somehow managed to reach despite everything, and now he wasn't even there. His seat was empty. He was here, in a hospital, while everyone else celebrated. He read the message but didn't respond. What could he say? That his mom was maybe dying? That he'd failed at the one thing he was supposed to do today? That after 4 years of barely holding it together, this was how it ended? He put his phone back in his pocket. A doctor came out about an hour later. Daniel jumped up, his heart in his throat. The doctor looked tired but not panicked, which Daniel hoped was a good sign. "Are you here with the patient in room 4? "Yes, that's my mom." "Is she okay?" "She's stable now. She had a serious arrhythmia and irregular heartbeat. We've got her on medication and we're monitoring her closely. She's going to need to stay for a while, probably a few days. We need to run more tests and adjust her medications. But she's going to be okay? The doctor hesitated. She's stable for now, but I'm not going to lie to you. Her heart condition is serious. She needs to reduce stress, take her medications regularly, and follow up with a cardiologist. This isn't something that's going to go away. Daniel nodded, trying to process everything. Can I see her? In a little bit. Let us get her settled in a room first. Someone will come get you. More waiting. Daniel sat back down. Other people came and went from the waiting room. A woman with a crying baby. An elderly man holding his arm. A teenage girl who looked like she'd been in a car accident. Everyone had their own crisis, their own emergency. Daniel was just one more person in a room full of people whose lives had gone wrong. Around 10:30, a nurse finally came to get him. She led him through hallways and up an elevator to a regular hospital room. His mom was in bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs. She looked small in that bed, fragile in a way that scared him. When she saw him, she started crying again. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I ruined your graduation. Daniel pulled a chair up next to her bed and took her hand. You didn't ruin anything. Don't apologize. I'm just glad you're okay. But you worked so hard. You were supposed to walk across that stage. Your dad and I were supposed to be there taking pictures, being proud. And instead you're here because of me. I'm here because I love you. That's more important than any ceremony. They sat in silence for a while. Daniel watched the monitors beep, watched the numbers go up and down. His phone buzzed a few more times. Text messages from people asking where he was. He ignored them all. Nothing else mattered right now except being here, making sure his mom was okay. Around noon, his dad showed up with his sister. They'd found someone to watch her apartment for a bit so they could both come. His sister ran to their mom's bedside, crying and hugging her. His dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in a few hours. They all sat together, this little family that had been through so much, trying to comfort each other. A social worker came by around 2. She was nice, but Daniel hated what she represented. She talked about payment plans for the hospital bill, about assistance programs they might qualify for, about resources for families dealing with serious medical conditions. His dad nodded along, taking the pamphlets she handed him, but Daniel could see the defeat in his eyes. More bills they couldn't pay, more debt piling up, more weight on all of them. After the social worker left, Daniel's dad turned to him. You should have been at graduation. I was where I needed to be. No, Daniel. You've sacrificed too much already. You've given up so much for this family. That was supposed to be your day, your moment. And we took that from you. You didn't take anything. This isn't your fault. None of this is anyone's fault. Daniel's voice was firm, but inside he felt like screaming. Because it wasn't fair. It really wasn't fair. 4 years of work, 4 years of sacrifice. And he'd missed the one moment that was supposed to be his. The one time when he was supposed to be celebrated. But what good would screaming do? What good would anger do? It wouldn't change anything. His mom would still be sick. They'd still be broke. And graduation had already happened without him. His empty chair had already told its story to a room full of people who didn't know him and probably didn't care. His mom reached out and touched his face. My baby boy. My strong, wonderful boy. I'm so proud of you. You know that, right? Diploma or no diploma, ceremony or no ceremony, I'm so proud of the man you've become. Daniel felt his eyes fill with tears. He'd been holding it together all day, being strong, being the one everyone could lean on. But hearing his mom say that, seeing the love in her eyes despite all the pain she was in, it broke something in him. He put his head down on the edge of her bed and cried. Really cried for the first time in years. Cried for all of it. The lost opportunities, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the weight of trying to keep everyone afloat while drowning himself. His mom stroked his hair like she used to do when he was little. His dad put a hand on his shoulder. His sister held his hand. And in that hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the smell of antiseptic, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt seen. He felt loved, not for what he could do for them or how he could help, but just for being him. It wasn't graduation. It wasn't a ceremony with caps and gowns and applause, but maybe, in its own way, it was something more important. Mrs. Patterson couldn't stop thinking about that empty chair. After the graduation ceremony ended and everyone went home to their celebrations, she sat in her classroom alone, staring at her phone. Daniel still hadn't responded to her text. She'd tried calling twice. Both times it went straight to voicemail. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her gut. This wasn't a kid who'd blown off graduation because he didn't care. This was something else. Something serious. She opened her laptop and pulled up the school's student information system. It took her a few minutes of searching, but she found Daniel's file. There was an emergency contact number listed for his father. She hesitated for just a moment, wondering if she was overstepping. But then she thought about that empty chair and dialed the number. A man answered on the third ring. He sounded stressed, exhausted. "Hello? Hi, this is Mrs. Patterson. I'm a teacher at Riverside High School. I'm calling about Daniel. Is everything all right? He wasn't at graduation this morning and I'm worried." There was a long pause. "Then we're at County Hospital. My wife, she had a heart emergency this morning. Daniel rode with her in the ambulance. He's been here all day." Mrs. Patterson felt her own heart clench. Is she going to be okay? They think so. She's stable now. But it was bad. Really bad. The man's voice cracked. "Daniel missed his graduation because of us. Because we're a mess. Because we can't give him what he deserves. Don't say that. He's where he needs to be. Family comes first." Mrs. Patterson was already grabbing her purse, her car keys. "What room is she in?" "I'm coming down there." "You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to." "I want to. What room?" He gave her the information. Mrs. Patterson was out the door before they even hung up. As she drove to the hospital, her mind was racing. She thought about Daniel, about everything he'd been carrying alone. She thought about how close she'd come to not reaching out, to just accepting that empty chair and moving on with her day like everyone else had. When she got to the hospital, she didn't go straight to the room. First, she made a phone call. Then another. And another. She stood in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes, making call after call, sending text after text. Some people answered. Some didn't, but she kept trying. Finally, she headed inside. She found the room and knocked gently on the door. A tired-looking man opened it. Daniel's father. She could see the resemblance immediately. "Mrs. Patterson." "Yes, I'm sorry to intrude. I just wanted to check on everyone." He let her in. The room was small and crowded. Daniel's mom was in the bed, looking pale but awake. A young girl, maybe 12 or 13, sat in one corner. And there was Daniel, sitting in a chair next to his mother's bed, still in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his eyes red from crying. When Daniel saw her, his face went through several emotions: surprise, embarrassment, then something that looked like relief. "Mrs. Patterson? What are you doing here?" "I was worried about you. Your seat was empty today." She walked over to him, and before he could react, she pulled him into a hug. He stiffened at first, but then she felt him relax, felt him hug her back. "I'm so glad your mom is okay." "Me too," he whispered. She pulled back and looked at him. This boy who'd been carrying the world on his shoulders. This boy who nobody had really seen until it was almost too late. "You know what? I've been thinking. That ceremony this morning, it wasn't really graduation anyway." Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, graduation isn't about sitting in an uncomfortable chair for 2 hours listening to boring speeches. Graduation isn't about walking across a stage and shaking the principal's hand. That's just the performance, the show we put on. Real graduation is about what you've accomplished, what you've overcome, what you've become." "But I missed it." "No, Daniel, you didn't miss anything that matters. You've already graduated in every way that counts. You've worked 2 jobs while going to school full-time. You've helped support your family. You've survived challenges that would have broken most people. You've shown more strength and character than any of your classmates who walked across that stage today." Tears were running down Daniel's face again. "It doesn't feel like enough. I feel like I failed." "Failed? Daniel, you got a diploma while working 40 hours a week. You passed your classes while dealing with things that most adults couldn't handle. You've been a son who stepped up when his family needed him. How is any of that failure?" His mother spoke up from the bed, her voice weak but determined. "She's right, baby. You haven't failed. You've been a hero." "Our hero." Mrs. Patterson's phone buzzed. She looked at it and smiled. "Actually, I have a surprise for you. But first, Daniel, there's a suit hanging in my car. I believe it's yours. And you're going to want to put it on. Why? Just trust me. 20 minutes later, Daniel emerged from the bathroom wearing the suit. It really did fit perfectly. His hair was still a mess, but someone had found a comb. He looked confused but also curious. "What's going on?" "You'll see. Everyone, if you'll follow me." Mrs. Patterson led the small group down the hallway, past nurses and patients and visitors. Daniel's father pushed his mother in a wheelchair, the IV pole attached to it rattling as they went. His sister held Daniel's hand. They took the elevator down to the first floor, then walked toward the main lobby. As they rounded the corner, Daniel stopped dead in his tracks. The lobby was full of people. Principal Morrison was there in his formal suit. Mr. Hughes and 3 other teachers from Riverside High stood beside him. And students. At least a dozen of them still in their graduation gowns, grinning and holding up their phones to record. "What is this?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "We're not graduating without you, Daniel. Not officially anyway. Come on." They'd set up a small area in the lobby. Principal Morrison stepped forward, holding Daniel's diploma in his hands. Hospital staff had gathered around to watch. A few other patients and families stopped, sensing something special was happening. "Daniel Park." Principal Morrison's voice rang out clear and strong in the hospital lobby. "For 4 years, you've been a student at Riverside High School. You've faced challenges that would have defeated most people. You've shown courage, determination, and incredible strength of character. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known. And today, even when your family needed you most, you showed what truly matters. Family, love, being there for the people who depend on you." Daniel was crying openly now. His mother was crying. His father. His sister. Even some of the teachers had tears in their eyes. "It is my absolute honor," Principal Morrison continued, "to present you with your diploma. You've earned this in every possible way. Congratulations, Daniel. You did it." The small crowd erupted in applause. Students whooped and cheered. Nurses clapped. Even a few security guards joined in. Daniel walked forward, shaking, and accepted his diploma from the principal. They shook hands, and then the principal pulled him into a hug. "I'm sorry we didn't see what you were dealing with," he said quietly. Just for Daniel. "I'm sorry we didn't help sooner. But we see you now, and we're so proud of you." One by one, the students came forward. These were classmates Daniel had barely spoken to in years. But they hugged him. They congratulated him. They told him they were sorry they hadn't been better friends, that they wished they'd known, that they thought he was amazing. Mrs. Patterson came forward last. She handed him the gift bag she'd brought. "Open it later, but know that it comes with something more important than what's inside. It comes with the absolute certainty that you're going somewhere, Daniel. College, career, wherever you want to go. You've got people in your corner now. You're not alone anymore." They took photos. So many photos. Daniel in his suit holding his diploma, surrounded by people who'd come just for him. Daniel with his arm around his mom in her wheelchair. Daniel with his teachers. Daniel with the principal. His face in every photo showed a mix of emotions: shock, joy, gratitude, relief, and something else. Something like hope. One of the students had brought a spare cap and gown. Daniel put them on right there in the hospital lobby. Someone started a chant. "Throw the cap! Throw the cap!" Daniel laughed, really laughed for the first time in years, and threw his graduation cap in the air. Everyone cheered as it sailed up toward the ceiling, spinning before falling back down.